Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. Talks between US and Taliban officials in Qatar, scheduled to last 2 days, have now gone on for 5 days and are likely to continue until Saturday. The two sides are trying to work out a mechanism for a ceasefire agreement, a US troop withdrawal timetable, and to open dialogue with the Afghan government. The US side also wants guarantees that the Afghan soil will not be used for any hostile acts against the United States and its allies. Pakistan's Foreign Office spokesperson Dr. Mohammad Faisal told reporters on Thursday, and I quote, "The ongoing peace talks in Qatar have been facilitated by Pakistan. Pakistan, as a part of the shared responsibility, is facilitating the ongoing round of talks between US and the Taliban in Doha. Negotiations are between the two parties for which Pakistan and Qatar are providing the necessary support and facilitating the talks," unquote. Meanwhile, Taliban announced a reshuffle of their negotiating team on Thursday, appointing Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar as the team lead. Baradar is one of the 4 co-founders of the Taliban movement, which appeared on the chaotic battlefields of Afghanistan in 1994. He is scheduled to reach Doha tonight. On the political side, the unity government of President Ashraf Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah suffered a setback when Ghani sacked Abdullah's close confidant and Deputy Chief Executive Mohammad Mohakkik, prompting Abdullah to fire back at Ghani to say that the decision clearly violated the 2014 unity agreement. Abdullah has also said that US officials have indicated that only a partial withdrawal of forces was likely, even as Afghan Defense Ministry claimed that 68 Taliban fighters were killed in countrywide operations. Critics disagree and point to the helmet strike, which killed more than 30 Afghan civilians. The Afghan army operation follows a deadly attack on an intelligence base in Wardak province on Monday, which killed more than 125 soldiers and injured about 100. The Taliban claimed responsibility for it. To discuss the situation, we have with us General Waheed, former Chief of General Staff of the Pakistan Army, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, Associate Vice President of the Asia Center at the US Institute of Peace, David Sedney, Senior Associate CSIS, former Deputy US Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan and Pakistan, and currently acting president of American University of Afghanistan. Luciano Zaccara, an expert based in Doha. Let me quickly kick off with General Arshad. General Arshad, the talks in Doha, of course, we know there was a delay, primarily because of the intra-Gulf rivalries, with the UAE wanting to host the talks while there was a Qatari plane parked in Islamabad. But now the talks are happening, and Mullah Ghani Baradar has also been named as the team lead. Are you optimistic that they're going to get up from the table after they've achieved some kind of breakthrough?
Yes, I think I'm quite optimistic. I think the talks have taken a positive trajectory now. Taliban already had an office for many years in Qatar. I think there's a stable environment for talks between the US and Taliban. And with the Taliban changing its negotiating team, I think shows clearly willingness as well as seriousness of the Taliban to really get into serious talks with the US. And with the US obviously now whole hog going for the political settlement, I think it's important that these talks produce some kind of understanding between the two sides. And that is important because it's not only the US drawdown which is important. I think more important than that is the political framework which has to be in place for settlement and negotiations between the intra-Afghan negotiations, as well as the future security of Afghanistan as a country, because it's not only the US troop withdrawal which is going to be a positive sign, but more important than that, I think the understanding and commitment of the international community towards economic and security needs of Afghanistan as a country, which are going to decide whether Afghanistan is going to remain stable post-US withdrawal or not.
So what do you think is going to be the sequence here? Because we have, for instance, the Taliban demand about a US troop withdrawal timetable. Of course, on the other side, there's also the issue of ceasefire. And then, of course, sitting across from the Kabul government and talking to them. So you think that this is going to be the sequence also in terms of any initial breakthroughs?
In my view, the way I look at it, I think there are two, three important points, and these are sticking points. One is ceasefire, and there is some reluctance on, I believe, Taliban side to really announce ceasefire. I think there may be an understanding of maybe changing the terminology and understanding of what a ceasefire looks like, maybe end to violence and things like that.
Or maybe they're looking for a quid pro quo. I mean, in the sense that if the U.S. side indicates some kind of timetable, that then the Taliban leaders can go to their fighters on the ground and say, well,
that could happen, and I think that would be a positive thing to do, because the Taliban practically are controlling almost 60%. Even if they are not in physical control, they have influential control. And for some kind of ceasefire announcement, there has to be some giveaway from the other side. And that obviously will lead to maybe a breakthrough on the further impetus to this process of going into talks of intra-Afghan perspective, as
absolutely, and working out the modalities.
As well as some arrangement for an interim sort of political setup leading up to future elections and presidential elections and parliamentary elections and changes in constitution and what have you. But I think the immediate thing has to be some sort of understanding, give and take, to go into a sort of so-called ceasefire or reduction of violence or end to violence, and some U.S. announcement of how they look at troop withdrawal. Obviously, a very partial one.
Okay, thank you so much. That was General Waheed Arshad talking to us. David Sedney, give me a sense of what you see now happening. Is this some part of some kind of process, or is this what people normally associate, the impulsiveness of President Trump, that he had a gut feeling that this is not going to work? He was very skeptical during the review process also. And at some point, he probably decided that this is enough and we need to get out. Is it part of that, or do you think it's part of some kind of process that was building up towards this?
It was very much part of the process that was building up to this. The leak that was reported in the press about the withdrawal perhaps even delayed things a little bit, but that's been conclusively pushed back by the White House and by Senator Graham in his recent trip to Pakistan. But what we have on the ground now in the region is really spectacular. Mullah Baradar, in 2009 and 2010, was the leader of a group in the Taliban that wanted peace, that had opened negotiations with then Afghan President Hamid Karzai. He was arrested by the Pakistani authorities and kept in jail for 8 years. And if he had not been, maybe we would have had peace back then. But let's forget history. Mullah Baradar is clearly aimed, his political platform is getting peace with the Afghan government. The fact that he is now one of the top leaders of the Taliban, merging after the Taliban's winter meetings with a new leadership slate inside the Taliban, which we haven't seen yet, but I would expect to be full of those who support peace, is a very positive sign. In June of last year, there was a 3-day ceasefire. The Taliban were amazed at how enthusiastic their fighters and their families were about the ceasefire. There's been great pressure on the Taliban to come to the table and actually come to an agreement on peace. The Taliban fighters, many of them have decided they don't want to kill Afghans. If you look at the recent killing in Afghanistan by all sides, but especially the Taliban, it's almost all been Afghans who have been being killed. Afghans are tired of war on all sides and they want peace. So this is really a huge breakthrough. Mullah Baradar's arrival in Qatar later today will enable these talks to move to another level. In terms of sequencing, I think it really has to be some kind of package deal. The U.S. is not just going to announce a withdrawal. There's going to have to be a ceasefire as well. There's going to have to be immediate talks with the Afghan government. The fact that these talks have gone on this way is important. And finally, I want to stress the role of Pakistan. The Pakistani Foreign Ministry statement yesterday was really unprecedented. It made clear that the government of Pakistan is playing the active role that so many have sought from it for so long. And I think with the government of Pakistan involved the way it is, I particularly note the visit of Prime Minister Imran Khan to Doha earlier this week on the same day the talks began. Pakistan is finally throwing its full weight behind peace. And now that that's happened, I actually think that the surge towards peace, the momentum towards peace is almost unstoppable.
Okay. I'll obviously come back with a few more questions, but let me pull in Moeed Yusuf. Moeed, starting with what David said about Mullah Baradar, 2008, 2009, there are multiple versions of that and different and differing interpretations. What is yours? Let's begin with that, and then we get to the current process.
So I think I agree with David in terms of Baradar's possible role now. Definitely in 08, 09, he was one of those who was pushing to start some conversations. His arrest is a mystery. I mean, there are all sorts of views. You read Steve Cole's book, Directorate S, and he says the CIA and ISI both were in. Today, Tolo News in Afghanistan reported the same. I also believe that to be the case, and why both of them decided to pick him up jointly, I am not clear, and still not clear. But I think history is history, and right now, this is a positive move. I think Baradar's presence there will shake up the Taliban's political commission a little bit in Doha. Clearly, the talks are moving. Pakistan is out of the closet in saying that it's very much supporting and facilitating. It has been for a while. And you know, it's deja vu. It's ironic, but you're right back to 1989. It's so interesting. What you're going to now find is that the narrative of Pakistan in the US is going to start changing a little bit. Some people are going to say some positive things. The same people who've been saying other things. Here, I think you're going to see a different narrative on the US if things move forward. All of this comes back to one question. What does this mean for the future of Afghanistan? Is the deal still to find a way out, or is the deal to find peace in Afghanistan that lasts? If you want the latter, there is a problem. And the problem is that for everybody involved, the world ends the day the peace settlement happens, whatever that looks like. You talk to any policymaker anywhere, what happens the day after? And nobody's really thinking about this because we're so focused on this. If that's the case, I think you can get to a settlement, it won't last. And this is the time we need to start talking about how the US and Pakistan are going to cooperate post-settlement. How are you going to keep the Taliban to whatever they agree to? You know, there's this conversation about the residual force and all of that. 5,000 or 3,000 or 7,000 troops are not going to keep the Taliban in check. There have to be some other guarantees put in the system. So all of this is going to be very, very complicated, but I agree with David that I think where things are going, this is the first time that there's a serious momentum behind finding some way out of this mess.
So this announcement of Baradar as being the lead, do you think this is a signal, a strong signal from the Taliban that they really want some kind of breakthrough at this stage?
Yeah, I've been clear for months that the Taliban want a breakthrough, the US wants a breakthrough, Pakistan wants a breakthrough. In any such environment, you're going to have spoilers, you're going to have people who want to do it differently. And you are going to keep seeing that. Even this movement to Doha, the Iranians actually threw a spanner in the works, and that's why you're in Doha. You started with UAE, the UAE is not too happy, etc. You know, those kind of things. At this point, I see the biggest challenge in Afghanistan itself. The US and Pakistan clearly are now working on a plan, whatever that is. The Taliban have signaled that they want to move forward. Think about the Afghan government. The mistake we don't want to make is leave out the Afghan government and other political actors who are vying for power in Afghanistan. Because if I put myself in Ashraf Ghani's shoes, there is a scenario in which I, Ashraf Ghani, feel I'm going to be left out and there's nothing to gain.
Yeah.
Right? What is the olive branch there? What is the Afghan president and people around him and other political actors who feel that they're going to lose out when the Taliban come back in? What is on the table for them is another question to answer, which I haven't found good answers to.
Which in fact has something, you know, I mean, it corresponds with what you were saying earlier about the day after.
Yeah.
And on day after, let me go back to David. David, this is a very important question, and Moeed talked about 1989's kind of situation. We have also seen there were people also predicting a very precipitous sort of withdrawal, US withdrawal from Afghanistan. almost akin to frequent wind, the fall of Saigon, and lots of these analogies have been going around. So the day after is very important, and with that is what exactly happens to the political actors that have been in power courtesy of the US invasion in Afghanistan. So how do they become part of the settlement, the political settlement, or the political reconfiguration, or the review of the Constitution and the rest of it?
Well, Moeed is exactly right about the importance of the day after. The Taliban have the support of maybe 10% of the population, which means that 90% of Afghans support somebody else. 90% of the Afghans have another area, have another focus of their loyalty. But that is not unified, it's factionalized. And as Moeed was referencing, after 1989, rather than peace, what you had was a devastating civil war among all those Afghan factions. So if some kind of agreement that's reached now results in the other 90% of the Afghans going back to the gun and starting a civil war, then this will all be a huge failure. So it is a huge challenge, and primarily for the Afghans, to make sure those mistakes of the 1989, 1991 are not repeated. However, Afghans do have experience with a ceasefire. I'll refer again to the June ceasefire. That was really a seminal moment in the political psychology of Afghans, both Taliban and others. So I believe that there is a huge momentum for peace that did not exist in 1989 and 91. And then finally, this talk about the U.S. pullout and all that, I think that is a lot of talk by political pundits who don't really understand the situation. While there will be, in the case of peace, there may be some kind of drawdown, there are still security threats, particularly Daesh and its offshoots, where the United States is going to have some kind of presence in Afghanistan for some time to come. And beyond that, international commitment to Afghanistan, the sacrifices that not just the U.S., but NATO countries, other countries around the world have made, I think will make sure that there will be support for Afghanistan. But whether that support is used effectively is really up to the Afghans themselves. And so far, it's an open question about whether they will be able to do that.
Okay, David, as a former Department of Defense policy maker, can you give me 2 or 3 watersheds that, when you're looking back, obviously hindsight is 20/20, where the rethink tells you that perhaps things could have been done differently?
I've been involved in the Afghan policy making since actually 2001, so I could look at many of those. I think perhaps the biggest one in recent years was the announcement by President Obama in December of 2009 that he was sending in more U.S. troops, but at the same time setting a deadline and announcing that they would be withdrawn. That ambivalent message and the ambivalence of the Obama administration from 2009 onwards really made continued conflict inevitable, because there was never a clear signal about what the United States was going to do in the long term. There was huge infusion of cash and weapons and fighters. It resulted in a great deal more violence, many more people being killed. So I would say that's the watershed moment, that ambivalent Obama speech and that continued ambivalent Obama policy in 2009.
I'm also joined by Luciano Zaccara. You're on the ground in Doha, I believe. Are you following what's happening as far as the talks are concerned? Can you fill us in on any details?
Well, actually, it's very difficult to access to this kind of negotiations personally, but of course, everybody's discussing about this here in Doha. I mean, this is showing how Qatar is still working as a mediator in the region, that is providing the venue, as well as Emirates did a few weeks ago, to try to solve issues, to try to provide a venue that is helping in solving the Afghan issue. The office of the Taliban was opened here a few years ago because of the United States also tried to push this office to be open in order to have a venue to have direct conversations with the Taliban in order to fix the Afghan issue. And this has been going on for a while, although recently was restarted, was recovered as a main venue for this conversation to take place. Actually, one of the founders of the Taliban is supposed to be flying now to Qatar to join the conversations that were supposed to 2 days, and they were extended for the 4th day. Actually, supposedly the meeting is taking place today. It's continuing today, meaning that it could be a good outcome for this meeting, having in mind that one of the main figures of the Taliban is joining the conversations. As I say, it's very difficult to access directly to this kind of conversation, but everybody is commenting on this in the academic and the diplomatic environments.
Okay, thank you. That was Luciano Zaccara talking to us from the ground in Doha. Moeed Yusuf, going back to the watershed moments, mistakes made all around. If I were to ask you to chalk out a list, how would you sequence it?
I'm not sure. For me, there's not a sequence. I've been arguing for years now that there wasn't a mistake here. My argument throughout has been that the US and Pakistan both have been brutally rational in their calculus on what they wanted. And that rationality led them to a collision course. Simple as that. As the US saw Project Afghanistan and its interests, and as Pakistan saw its regional interests. Now, you can debate whether both sides actually saw the interests that they should have. But statecraft is not about what you wish for. It is what you have. Pakistan thinks a certain way about the region. India is its biggest problem. The US came into Afghanistan to create a very different Afghanistan. Those were inherently contradictory. It was only a matter of time after 9/11. Al-Qaeda was what brought them together. Taliban was never a question in my mind that they would actually diverge on that. They continued to. For 17 years, the US kept pushing Pakistan that if you see your real interest, you'll work with us. Pakistan continued to tell the US, well, if you actually get this region right, you will figure out that we have it right. I think this was purely rational on both sides. Where I think we've got it wrong is both sides have tried too hard in the past 17 years to convince the other that only they are right. And that's where the collision continued. So I don't think there is a mistake here. Of course, you can say one thing could have been done this way or that way. Even the point that David makes about President Obama's surge. The surge in hindsight didn't work out. The timeline may have been wrong. But the US goal of victory still collided with Pakistan's goal of getting the Taliban back in some political settlement. So yeah, for the US that may not have worked. Pakistan on its side may have done certain things, as David points to, which the US didn't like at all. But from Pakistan's perspective, I think Pakistan felt that was the thing they needed to do for their own interests. So I think the interests were colliding from the very beginning, and that's what we've seen.
But since 2008, and I mentioned 2008 because that's when we got the first political government in office, there was always this talk about Pakistan facilitating an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned dialogue. There's also been a sense, both on the civilian side as well as on the military side, that yes, India is a very important adversarial element in Afghanistan, and we don't want to, be in a nutcracker of sorts. But at the same time, to my knowledge, I haven't come across anyone in Pakistan who has said that they would want a repeat of the 90s.
Yeah, nobody wants a repeat of the 90s. But look, let me make a very controversial statement. I do not think there's been a single day in 17 years that Pakistan trusted the US intention in Afghanistan. The US project in Afghanistan was seen as a perpetuation of Indian influence. And I don't think there's a single day in 17 years that the US trusted Pakistan on its ask about political settlement and letting the Taliban come in, etc. The reason both sides have converged now is that there is fatigue. Right? The war hasn't worked out, and now we want an end to the war. Both have come together, and in fact, I would argue, Pakistan's actually got the position that it wanted in terms of getting the Taliban in but not on top, have a political settlement, because Pakistan's ultimate goal is to get these Taliban back into Afghanistan without having perpetuation of Indian influence. Why has the US come around to that? Simply because the war has gone on too long, and there is a US president that basically wants wars to end now.
Okay, now that's a very important point. I have to take a quick break, but at the other end of the break, I would like to get Sedney's opinion on this. Sure. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. We're discussing the situation in Afghanistan, of course, the peace talks that are happening in Doha, whether it's they'll actually lead to a negotiation phase, because this is the pre-negotiation phase. David, right back to you on what Moeed said about his argument that over the past 17 years, there was unlikely to be a convergence, a strategic convergence. Of course, there were tactical convergences, but strategic convergence between the US and Pakistani interests in Afghanistan. Would you agree with that assessment?
Well, this is an area where Moeed and I have some fairly sharp disagreements, and a lot of it has to do with our respective interpretations of history. And I would actually say that right now the focus should be on the future. In terms of the past history, I partly agree with Moeed that there was some rational thinking going on, but I also think that it has occurred in a very dynamic environment. The thing that I think is probably less understood in Pakistan than it really should be is the changes that have occurred in Afghanistan over the last 18 years. The Afghanistan of today is hugely different than the Afghanistan of the 1990s. This is not the same country. The Taliban could not rule the current Afghanistan the way they did in the 1990s. And I think at some point recently the Pakistani government has realized that a Taliban could not effectively rule Afghanistan. At the same time, in Afghanistan, people want peace. And this the drive on both sides, on the side of the Afghans for peace and the recognition on the part of Pakistan that the Taliban could no longer effectively run Afghanistan, and therefore supporting the Taliban's desire to rule Afghanistan would be counter to Pakistan's interest, is, I think, an evolution in Pakistani thinking. So I think there's been a lot of change in Pakistan on that thinking. In terms of the U.S., I think Moeed is putting too much on the idea that about this alleged troop withdrawal thing, this leak in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year. President Trump has always wanted to withdraw U.S. troops from Korea, from Japan, from Europe, but he hasn't done so yet. So just because President Trump wants something doesn't actually mean it happens, as we're finding out with the wall, and U.S. government workers are finding out with no paycheck. That's not really the issue. The issue is, where will peace take Afghanistan? And I'd like to focus on the future, and there, as I said, I'm really optimistic.
So, David, I agree with you that we have to look towards the future, but some lessons from the past are also important. So, let me posit it this way. In many ways, in terms of bringing modernity to Afghanistan, the PDPA and even the Soviets weren't doing anything much different from what the US and its allies have tried to do. Of course, we have entered the digital age, and you now have the millennials in the Afghan urban centers. But the essential thing about the solidarity groups and the inability of different solidarity groups to come together and become a nation has always been visible to me every time I've been to Kabul, where if a minister is Uzbek, right down to an office runner, there'll only be Uzbeks. The police vehicles, if there are Tajiks in the police vehicles, they'll have Masood's picture displayed on their vehicles, and so on. So these are some of those things. And if we go back into history, every time Kabul tried to centralize authority, there were insurgencies or revolts in the countryside. So this has been a country that has always been governed through negotiations, where the central authority negotiates with whoever is representing a solidarity group. Do you really think that that situation has in terms of the society having changed to a point where we can expect the future to be any different from the past?
Yes, the society has changed in remarkable ways, and it's changed throughout Afghanistan. The Afghanistan that you described does exist, but there's another broader Afghanistan. And it's not just because people are young, but it is a lot about communication. The fact that Afghans now can communicate with each other, travel, and so many Afghans have lived in other countries, including in Pakistan. Afghanistan is no longer a place that is separated from the world. It's a place that wants to be with the rest of the world. Do you know what the most popular thing in Afghanistan right now is? It's Afghanistan's cricket team. The fact that Afghanistan has got to the top ranks of cricket is something that has made Afghans incredibly proud. The Taliban banned cricket when they were in charge. That's not going to happen in the future.
Incidentally, we had much to do with that cricket thing. But you know, that's a very good example. Moeed, David is optimistic. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but what I have seen personally in Afghanistan are these divisions along ethnic, tribal lines, even in the urban centers. Many of the people that now are part of the Afghan government are basically those warlords that fought incessantly and in many ways were no different from the Taliban. So since you started talking about the day after, perhaps we could carry the conversation further on this.
So a couple of points. First, just to clarify, David, I don't think I spoke about the withdrawal at all. I think that's not a variable I'm looking at. The point here is that 17 years down the line, we recognize that a military victory is not possible. And thus, there is an urgency to do something else. And there is a US president who actually says broadly that war should end. And I actually support that. So it's not necessarily about the number of troops left behind. It is that there is a real urgency. I think the Taliban also recognize, like David said, they can't rule like the 90s. I think Pakistan has made it absolutely clear to the Taliban that it will not support the Taliban if they think that they are going to rule Afghanistan again, let alone like the 90s. And quite frankly, they also recognize that political legitimacy lies in a political settlement, not in continuing to fight forever. So I think on that count, I'm optimistic. On Afghanistan itself, I wish I could be as optimistic as David, but my issue is less with the divisions. I mean, we haven't given Afghanistan a chance to mature as this new society. 17 years doesn't create a nation. The Afghan army we talk a lot about. You know, if there is a civil war tomorrow, it will disintegrate. So these things will take time. My real problem is very simply instrumental. Afghanistan has never been and is not ready to be an independent economy. It does not have the resources to sustain itself. It needs continuous...
Despite all the minerals? I mean, one of the arguments is that once the war ends, there will be lots of investors coming in and, you know...
But every single country in the world says that. Yeah. And you can look at Pakistan, which is far more stable, and yet you can look at the amount of investment that comes in this country. So no, I don't think that's going to happen, right? The problem here is that international commitment has to remain not only in terms of political commitment, but economic commitment, right? And there is where I have a problem with these divisions, because once the resource pie shrinks, there's going to be a problem, there is going to be infighting, and that's what Afghans would need to control. And that's why I keep insisting that we shouldn't lose sight that we are not only trying to get to a political settlement, we need a political settlement that will sustain. And let me also tell you, as somebody who sits in a peace building institute, overwhelming majority of peace settlements in the world fall apart within 5 years. And Afghanistan's history is not positive on that. So I'm not trying to be pessimistic unnecessarily. What I'm saying is, I don't want to declare victory just because somebody signs on a dotted line. On that part, I am net optimistic, but I think there are a number of hiccups still on the way. And let's not think that 5 days after they started the talks in Doha, this will be all resolved, no matter what announcement comes out of that.
Okay. David, any thoughts on what Moeed said?
I agree with him entirely that much hard work remains ahead, and I agree with you that the ethnic divisions in Afghanistan are a major problem. I am optimistic about the future of Afghanistan because of my involvement with Afghans youth, with Afghans who are the next generation of leaders, but all of them recognize these obstacles as well. So there are huge challenges ahead, but facing those challenges in an atmosphere of peace rather than an atmosphere of war gives them a leg up. Yes, I think I'm realistic about the challenges, but I'm very, very optimistic about the future because of the commitment of the Afghan people to peace.
But let me ask you this, since Moeed raised this, and this is in fact a very important issue, which is sustainability, economic sustainability, because a lot of what Afghanistan now has is because of foreign donations, foreign funds, and the appetite for putting in more money is, of course, drying up. So once peace returns, we are assuming in theory, then there will be some kind of demand for sustaining or rejuvenating the economy, because the world is unlikely to continue to pay for the Afghan coffers, no?
Well, actually, the future economic issue was the centerpiece of the Geneva meeting, international meeting in November of last year about the future of Afghanistan. And the commitments of other countries to continue to help Afghanistan were quite strong. But even outside help won't be enough. Afghanistan, just like Bangladesh, like Pakistan, like any other country that has a very troubled economic past, will face challenges in the future. So that will be a huge challenge for a future government. But I don't think it's an insurmountable one. I don't have the solutions. I'm not an economist, and I'm not a state builder. And there will be real disruptions along the way economically. But with peace, I think you'll see the economy rebound very strongly, and there will be opportunities for Afghanistan to join the world in ways it has never done before.
Thank you so much, David Sedney, former Deputy U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan and Pakistan, for speaking with us. Before I wrap up, this does seem like an opportunity to do the right thing, even if it is purely because of mission creep or fatigue or whatever way you might want to put it. But I'm struck by your reference to the day after, can you give me a sense of, if this comes round to the ceasefire and withdrawal timetable, and also Taliban agreeing to sit vis-a-vis from the Afghan government, what kind of configuration is likely to emerge, or what would the demands be from either side of the Afghan divide?
Yeah, I mean, look, I sort of do this day in, day out, and have been for a few months. So I think in my mind, it's pretty clear. First of all, I don't think you're going to get a ceasefire where it's a generalized ceasefire. The Taliban will be dead the moment they do that as a movement. I don't think you will have...
So it's more likely to be regional ceasefire.
I think so. And they will renege, and then somebody will come back. I mean, it's going to be messy. You're not going to have the US come tomorrow and say, okay, we're leaving tomorrow morning, and then thank you very much. So we've got to be realistic. What's going to happen, I think, is there's going to be a middle. There's going to be some localized ceasefire kind of thing that the Taliban would have to put on. The US would have to give some timeline on how quickly they are willing to leave, what kind of conditions they want. Then at some point, I think you've got to move towards an interim Afghan setup. The elections are already delayed. I think you have an opening.
I don't think that's going to happen, because I think everyone is waiting.
The elections are not going to happen. Yeah. At that, I mean, April, of course, is delayed to July, but you need some interim setup. For that, constitutionally, you've got to go to the Afghan Loya Jirga.
Correct.
You've got to set that up. You've got to bring an interim government. That interim government or setup probably will have the Taliban or parts of the Taliban involved. They would have people who the Taliban are willing to talk to. That's the formation, I think, where the negotiation between Afghans will have to happen. Once that happens, that's where I think the constitutional amendments, what happens in the future, who gets what, that's where it will have to be decided. The US will watch and sit in, Pakistan will watch and sit in, Others will try and sit in or spoil, depending on where you are. Ultimately, if all of this goes well, the next election in Afghanistan, whenever it happens, the Taliban would be part of it one way or another. All of this said, I think there's an elephant in the room. The Taliban know they cannot win an election. There's absolutely no way. They're not prepared for the kind of politics that you have when you have coalitions. And so the biggest challenge is, how do you keep the agreement intact, not only as you put it down on paper, not only in letter, but also in spirit. Because rationally, if I'm the insurgent, I want to come in, I want to get political legitimacy, and then I want to expand my influence. And rationally, if I'm the other side, I want to bring you in as the insurgent and then lock you there so that you can't go any further. That's going to be the real. But even to get from here to where what I'm saying will happen, most likely, we've got a lot of stages. So let's not sort of jump the gun here.
Who are likely to be the spoilers? I'm talking about the states. Would India be a spoiler?
Well, of course India will, right? I mean, anything that happens in which the Taliban come into the system is a net negative for India. Yeah. If this negotiation goes...
but assuming that after all this has happened and the Taliban don't emerge as a sizable political force, then I don't think the Indians would be much bothered about their presence.
Well, two things. First of all, if that is to happen, India, Pakistan have to agree on a formula for peaceful coexistence in Afghanistan. That proxy situation has to end. That won't end because of the settlement. That has to happen separately. I've been pushing this case publicly in the US here, that the US needs to get India and Pakistan to talk. If you keep looking the other way, this proxy situation is going to mess things up, number one. Second, I don't think this is as simple as, oh well, the Taliban are in but not on top, so it's okay. The south and east of Afghanistan, Pakistan has serious concerns about. I don't think Pakistan will basically say it's fine, whatever is going to happen. So that negotiation has to happen. One other point, all of this ultimately comes to naught if you don't think of the US-Pakistan relationship. You can do whatever you want in Afghanistan. One of the biggest problems we have right now is the day after the negative sentiments about Pakistan in the US, people are waiting in the wings to jump and say, thank God this is over, get rid of these guys.
Oh, they've already started doing, and by the way, there are lots of Pakistanis in
I was
the
about
US.
to say, it's, so the point here is you need to actually work this bilateral peace now, not only for US-Pakistan, but I keep insisting, even for Afghanistan's stability after the settlement, Pakistan and the US will have to work together, otherwise it won't hold.
Thank you, Dr. Moeed Yusuf. This is all the time we have for this program. We'll see you next week. Until then, it's goodbye.